Hello YouTube, welcome back to my channel. So in today's tutorial, we're going to go over Pytest. So Pytest is a Python library that is used to write tests for your different applications. So basically, whenever you write, let's say like a web application, let's say like an API, you want to test if the API works properly, and Pytest is just the library used for that. So in this tutorial, I'm going to teach the very basics of Pytest, so that you guys can begin writing better applications by making sure that your applications are tested and well proven before pushing them into production or deployment. So in this tutorial, I'm going to teach you very basic. It has nothing to do with web application, but just how to use Pytest in general. So in the future videos, we can make videos on how to use Pytest to test your web applications like API and stuff like that. So in this tutorial, I'm just going to teach you the very basics to lay the foundation for Pytest. So let's get started. So this is the Pytest official documentation. So you can just go to Google and search for Pytest, and then you can bring it, you can click on the first link. It will bring you to this documentation. So click on install. First we want to install the library. So this is the command to install it. So pip install and then Pytest. Okay, as you can see here is a command to install Pytest. Before we get Pytest installed, let's go ahead and actually set up our Python development environment. So I'm going to simply create a folder. I'm going to call this folder Pytest Intro, just like that. You can call it anything you want and just make it a normal directory. If you're on Windows, feel free to make a normal directory using the GUI. I'm just on Linux, so I'm going to make the directory through the terminal since it's easier for me that way. So I'm going to change directory into my Pytest Intro, and I'm in that directory. You can see currently we have nothing inside of that directory, right? So I'm doing an ls, which is just to list the content of that file. I think Windows, I think it's dir if you are using the terminal in Windows, but basically just create a simple folder on your machine. So now that we have this folder created, what we want to do is to create a virtual environment in Python. And the command to create a virtual environment is different from operating system to operating system. So in the comment section below, I'm going to leave a link to the Python official documentation, so you can create a Python virtual environment depending on the operating system on which you are. But feel free, it's not a must to create a virtual environment. So if you're not interested in creating a virtual environment, then install this Pytest in your global environment. Okay, so if you're not interested in creating a Python virtual environment, simply copy this command and install Pytest. Okay, but me, I'm going to go ahead and create a virtual environment. So to create that in Linux, we have to do Python -m and then this is venv, and then we are going to call it venv. So this is going to go ahead venv. So let me just repeat, let me just put here Python 3. Let me just put Python 3 here, Python 3 venv, and Python 3 -m m venv, and then venv. So a virtual environment to be called venv. So when I do an ls, you can see I have a folder there called venv. So I'm now going to go ahead and activate my virtual environment, and then venv/bin/activate. And this is to activate a virtual environment is different from one operating system to the other. So now that my virtual environment is created now and activated, I want to go ahead and actually install Pytest. Okay, so now if you didn't create a virtual environment, also go ahead and actually install Pytest right now. So I'm going to copy this, go back to my terminal, and just simply paste this in here, and this is going to go ahead and install Pytest on my virtual environment because I don't want to install it on my global Python environment. Okay, so I just did pip install Pytest, and that took have Pytest install. So now you can see that the installation was successful. So now we can go ahead and actually begin to code in using Pytest. Okay, so I'm just going to open up my Visual Studio Code, or feel free to use any editor that you are using, and yeah, and then from there you can begin coding. So I'm just waiting for my Visual Studio Code to open up. So now that my Visual Studio Code has already opened up, you can go ahead and actually create a folder. So we're going to create two folders. One folder is going to be for the program folder. Let's say you're going to, in this case, you're going to do two things. I'm going to just show you. So create two folders. The first folder should be called program. So I'm just going to create a folder. I'm going to call it programs, just like that. And I'm also going to create another folder called tests, where I'm going to keep all my tests. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead, create another folder called test. Okay, so now that it's created, I'm going to go ahead, create another folder, and this folder I'm going to call it tests. So tests like that. Yeah, so now that we have these two folders created, first of all, what we want to do is that sorry, I created this folder in the wrong place, so let me just go ahead and actually delete it. Now that is deleted, I'm going to go ahead and create another folder here, and it's going to be in our root directory. So I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to call it test, just like that. So you can see I have these two folders here. So I have the programs folder and the test folder. So in the programs folder, we're going to write our program. So the first program that we're going to write is a simple calculator. Then you're going to write a test to test the functionality of this calculator. So I'm just going to go ahead and actually call it I'm going to call it calculator and .py. Okay, So in this calculator.py, we're just going to create a simple function to do addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication. Okay, so the first function will just be a div, and then this is going to be called addition. So I'm going to take in an x of type int, and I'm going to take in y of type int. So if you don't know what type hints are in Python, I have a whole tutorial on type hints, so I'm going to leave the link to the video in case you guys are interested, or you can just go to my YouTube channel and find that video there. So in this thing, this function, what you're simply going to return is a sum of x plus y, just like that. So that's the first function. Let's set another function called, I'm going to call it subtraction, and I'm going to pass in again, I'm going to take in two variables. I'm going to take in x, and it's going to be of type int, and y is going to be of type int. Okay, I'm just going to use this for integers. Okay, so if you want maybe to pass floats, then you can leave this to be blank. Okay, so let's say our calculator can take in floats, right? So this necessarily must not be int, so you can pass in anything you want. Even if you pass in a float, this thing will not, program will not crash, because Python basically at the core is still a dynamically typed language. Okay, so we're going to return here is going to return x. We're going to take x minus y, just like that. And then you're going to have another function. I'm going to have another function down here, and this function is going to be called multiply, just like that. And it's going to take x, and let's just leave the types, and then let's say y, also x and y. And then we're simply going to return the product of this, also x multiplied by y, and that's all we're going to do. So make sure that you follow the Python convention, and this the convention states that it must be 2 lines after each function, if I'm not mistaken. So we're going to have the division, and this is going to take in x and y, and it's going to simply return. So it's going to return. So we're going to return here x divided by y, just like that. So that's basically what we need to have for this calculate, and this is simply going to add two numbers. So you can just call this function and then pass in a value, and then you get back. So for example, if I just call the add and I pass in 3 and 4, just like that, and if I run this program, it's simply going to return to me a sum of this. So I'm going to go ahead and actually run this program, and feel free to run the code anyhow you so let me just do an else, change into programs. And then in here I can see my calculator, so I'm going to do Python 3 and then calculator, and then you can simply run it. Okay, we are not actually printing out anything, so it's just returning it. So we're going to call a simple print here, so print, and then we can just print the output of that function. So I'm just going to run this code again, and you can see 4 plus 3 is definitely 7, and we have 7 right here. So that's basically our calculator, and it works. So how do you write a function to test this program that you just written? Like, let's say that you have this is actually a commercial product, and you're going to send it to the market. So, and you want to write some text to prove that it works. So how do you go ahead writing the test? And this is why we're going to use Pytest. So let's go into our test folder, and in our test folder we can just create a folder called test1. So I'm just going to create a folder here. I'm going to call it test_1.py. Okay, so make sure that the way you name this file, the test file, is very important, because Pytest uses the names of these files in order to identify which file contains a test. So it is test and then underscore and then something else. So you can say testing underscore something, but by convention just say test underscore and then anything that you want, but it must start with testing. Okay, you can also go ahead and actually read the official documentation if you want more information on this. So yeah, that's basically it for how you should name your files, and also the way you name your test cases must also have for that convention, test and then underscore and then something else. Okay, I think you can also use testing. Okay, so you can just try testing or test, but make sure that you keep it simple. Just keep test underscore and then something else. You can actually read the official documentation to see what they say about the naming conventions. Okay, so I think you can search it here, and then you can just say naming conventions. Okay, let me just see if I can get that here. So let's see if you can get that. I don't think that should return, but let's see. So let's see, naming standard. So you can just they have the naming standard, so you can go ahead and actually read it to get more information about that. So but that's basically it. So for what you're going to do, you're going to keep things simple, and you're going to say test underscore and then something else. Even when you're writing the test, you're going to say test underscore and then something else. Okay, so I want to make this into a Python module, so I'm going to keep it the underscore init file here, underscore.py. Okay, that to make our package a module. So I'm also going to keep it here underscore init and underscore.py, just like that, Python package. So now that you have that, You can just close this, and in here I'm going to go ahead and just say from programs. You're going to import the add, the subtraction. You're going to import the division, and then you're going to import the multiplication. Multiply, I think I call it like that. Yeah, so this is what we're going to import from there, and in here we can go ahead and actually create a test for it. So we're going to test underscore add. So we're going to say test and then the name of the function that you're trying to test. That makes it more descriptive. So in the test function, what you're simply going to do is that, let me just show you how a basic test works. Okay, forget about all these imports for now. Let me just show you how a basic test works. So I'm going to say assert, and then I'm going to say assert, and I'm going to say print. I'm going to say assert takes in a boolean, right? So I'm going to say assert, I'm going to pass in true. So assert would simply return true, and the test will pass if assert, or whatever for the assert, returns a boolean of true. If it returns a false, then the test will fail. So how do you run your test? Okay, so I'm just going to go in here, and I can just simply do I'm just going to change my directory, yeah, clear this, and then I'm simply going to do Pytest, just like that, and you're going to just Pytest, and then you press enter. So you can see we have some output here. So it's saying that test interrupted, so one test error in this much seconds. So you say test underscore, you see it automatically locates the text folder and the words to test. So it says that interrupt during collection. So let's read the error: while importing module testing.py, make sure that the package have a package valid name. So it says that cannot import add from programs. So we have an error here, so we can't import add from programs. So let's try to fix that. Okay, from programs. Okay, I think I got the spelling wrong here, so it has to be programs, just like that. So now if I run the test again, so I'm just going to clear the terminal and do Pytest again, and now it says that cannot import name add from programs. So we have an issue. Okay, I think I made an error there, so I have to say programs.calculator, right? So .calculator, my bad, sorry for that. So now I can say programs.calculator, import that specific thing. Okay, so my bad there, sorry for that. I'm going to clear this terminal, and I'm going to run the Pytest again, and you can see our test has passed. So that's basically how you run a test. So if I return here, I change this to be a false statement, so let's say false, and I run this code again. So I'm just going to run my code again, run the test again. Now I run the test again, you can see our test has failed. Okay, so we have one failed test. So that's basically what assert works. So whatever statement that comes after this must return a true, right? A true, and then it will pass. If it returns a false, then the test will fail. Okay, let's now go ahead and actually test our add function. Let's say 3 and 4. This should be equals to 7, right? This will return a true, right? So let's see if the add function is actually indeed returning 7, which is supposed to do, right, to test if its functionality is correct. So let's go ahead and actually test that. So clear my terminal and then test this again. Yeah, exactly, we get back 7. Our test has passed. So if I put this to be 8, 4 plus 3 is 7, obviously not 8. So this should now return the test should be failing, right? So it expects 7, whereby this should be 7, but it has returned 8. So assert 7 is not equals to 8, right? 7 is never equals to 8. So that's how we run the first test. Now let's go ahead and actually run another test, and let's run the test for test underscore. This should be, I'll just call this subtract like this. I believe I call it like that. Let me just call subtract, just copy this. Let me see what I called it here. I called it subtraction, so copy it, and then make sure I get that spelling right. So subtraction, let me just say test underscore subtraction. Let me just subtraction underscore, let me just say step subtraction function, just like that. And in here we're just going to say assert, and then you're going to say assert. Let's try to subtract two numbers. Let's say 10 and 4, right? The answer should be equals to 6. So if the answer is 6, means that our subtraction function works and it has passed the test case. So now this should return a true, and if this returns a true, means that the test case has already passed. Okay, even assert, let's say subtraction, let's see why should that have failed. So assert 10 minus 4, the answer is definitely 6, but you're getting an error. So let's see why that test has failed. So let me just bring back my terminal here. Okay guys, I think I made a very silly error here. So let me just do this. I didn't actually call the function. I just created a parenthesis instead of calling the function. So I have to say assert subtraction 10 and 4, and then 10 minus 4 is definitely 6, so that test should have passed. So sorry for that error. I made an error there. So I'm just going to clear the terminal and run my test again. Now you can see the test has passed. So why don't we see any great output? We just see this. How does it indicate which, in case a test fails, right? So let's make this test to fail. So I'm just going to change this to be let's say 9 or anything like that. So I'm just going to run this again. Now run this again. Now you can see that one of the tests has failed, but it just did a dot and then an F. But this on this other line, when the test has passed, it did 2 green dots. So the dot shows the number of tests and then how they have passed. Okay, so now how do we make this to be more verbose, like to be more something that you can more interact intuitively understand? So we can do the V flag. So the V flag is going to verbose and it's going to tell us the, sorry, I made an error there, so let me just, so my bad there. I have to do Pytest, and then I have to do -v here. So I type in the wrong thing. So if I do -v, you can see now I can see the test add test and it has passed, and now I can see the add test subtraction function has now failed. That test has failed. So now that's how you can do the verbose to see something more precisely. So if I do back 6 and I go and run the test again, now we should see all of these tests has passed, and the verbosity test add function has passed, and then test subtraction function has also passed. So that's how you can do a verbose functionality. Let me just also show you another flag that I want to show. So let me say this print, and I say testing. Let me say testing subtraction function. So if I say testing subtraction function, and now let me go back and run the test again. So let me just bring back this and run the test again. Now you can see it didn't do any print out statement of testing subtraction function. If you look at this, there's no print out statement. So how do we get a print statement? So that's why we use another flag. So we have to say pytest and then -s. The -s is now going to now print that statement. So you can see testing subtraction function now has now been printed out, and the test has also passed. So that's how the S flag is used. So if you want to do print statement and you want to see them on the terminal, then you have to use the S flag. If you want to see the in a more intuitive way that you can explain, use like this format. That's why you use the V flag. Okay, then there's also one more flag called the X flag, just like this, the X flag. So the X flag is just used to escape warnings. In case you have warnings there and you don't want to see the warnings, then you can use -X, and then that warning will not be displayed. So great. So let's go ahead and actually write the other function to test the other function. So I'm going to say def, and then I'm going to say test. This is going to be division underscore function. So I'm going to test the division function, and you're going to just go ahead and you're going to say assert. So I'm going to now do an assert here. So I'm going to say assert, and then you're going to call the division function. So I'm going to say division, just like that. Let's say 10 divided by 5. That should be equals to that should be 2, right? So now we can go ahead and actually run the test. But before we run the test, let's actually run the other code for the other test. So def, and then you're going to say let me just follow the convention. So def test, this is going to be test underscore, this is going to be multiply, just like that. And then you're going to now assert if multiply over 2, let's say 10 and 2 is equals to 20, right? So 10 times 2 is 20, obviously. So if you now run this, that all the tests should have passed, as you can have already predicted. So just run all of this using the use the V flag, because we want to see a verbose output. So if I run this, you can see add this has passed, the subtraction function has passed, the testing division function has passed, test multiplication has also passed. Okay, so let's just keep all of this constant. Let's just keep underscore function or whatever. Let's also keep it here underscore function, but must start with the test, okay, because the naming convention. So take care of how you name this function. You just don't name them anything. You have to say test and then underscore something. Anything can follow after that. So great. So now you can see all our tests work right now, but by this time you have been manually testing parameters. What if I want to test a huge number of parameters at a time? So that's why we're going to talk about something called parameterized. Okay, how we do parameterized testing here. So we're going to say from Pytest, you're going to import mark, just like that. So from Pytest, you're going to go ahead and actually import mark mark. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to do a parameterized test. So we're going to use the decorators here. So if you're not a decorator, I have a whole series on decorators on my YouTube channel. So decorator is a callable that takes an input as a callable and returns a callable as an output. So we're going to now simply call a decorator here. We're going to call it mark.parameterize. Parameterized, just like this, and then you're now going to take in the variables that you want. So you're going to provide one string, and in this string you want to expect the following variables: the x variable or the y variable, and then the expected result. Because for our test to pass, we have to now make sure that the result that we got from the program is the expected result that we actually expected, right? So we're going to say expected result. Okay, so now here after that you copy a comma and then you pass in a list. One thing I have to mention is that you must not keep this to be individual strings like this, and then this also is string. No, that should not the case. You have to create one string, and in there you best pass in the variables as follows. Okay, so in this side of this list, I'm going to provide in a tuple. So a tuple, let's say that 2 plus 3, 2 plus 4, the answer should be 6, right? And that will be one test. And then let's go to another test, and then 10 and 3, the answer should be 20, and 3, the answer should be 23, right? That should be another test. Another test can be maybe minus 2 and let's say minus 2 and minus 4, that should be a minus 6, right? Yeah, so now we can go ahead and actually run this. How does the code get this into its variable? So you have to now pass in x and y, and then expected underscore results. So this will be the argument. So make sure the arguments are the same as the ones that you have specified here. So make sure that these two values are the same. So let's say this is expected argument, not arguments. So now instead of 3, we'll replace it with x. Instead of 4, we'll replace it with y, and then this will replace it with the expected result, just like that. So it's going to take this 2, it's going to plug it in here, and then 4 is going to plug it. The addition function returns 6, and if it's 6, then that test will successfully pass. So that's how you run parameterized test. Okay, so let's go back to our console, clear this, and then let's go ahead and actually run the test again, and you can see that all the tests have passed. So the first test, 4, 2, and this, the answer is 6, it has passed. 20 and 3 plus addition, it will be 23, and then 2 and 4 minus, it will be minus 6, and then other tests have passed as well. So you can go ahead and actually write parameterized test for this other function. So let's do it for one of these more function, and then we'll move on to something else. So let's do it here. It's going to say mark.parameterize, and then you're going to pass in a string here, and that string is going to have all our variables. So we're going to say expected variables rather, x, y, and then expected underscore result. So now that you have passed that, you're going to go ahead and actually pass in the list as well, and in the list you're going to pass a list of tuples. So you're going to pass in the tuple. So let's say 30 minus 12, let's say 30 minus 10, that should be 20, and then you have to say let's say that 10 minus 3, that should be 7. So you can just pass in different tests as you want. So let's say that also 20, let's say that 50 minus 25, let me say 25, and the answer should be 25, right? 50 minus 25, the answer should be 25. So in here to do, we have to write x, y, and then expected underscore result, just like this, and then you're going to pass in here x, y, and then you're going to it should be set to expected result, just like this. So you can go ahead and actually run this test one more time. So I'm going to go to my terminal, clear the output, and then run that again, and you can see all the tests have passed. So that's how you can write a basic test for a simple calculator. Now one thing I'm going to now show you that is that you have learned how to test functions. Okay, now how do we test objects and classes? That's what we're going to learn in the next tutorial. So what you're going to do, it's going to be very simple. Instead of our calculator program, let's create a file called person.py, and instead of person.py, that's what we're going to run. We're going to create a class called person, and this person can have expenses and incomes, how he uses his money, right? How he uses his spending. So we're going to create that file here. We're going to call it person.py, just like that. And inside person.py, we're going to create a class called person. So I'm going to say class, and I'm going to call this person, just like that. Just like that. And then you're going to have a def, a constructor basically, underscore init, and you're going to take self and you're simply going to return none, or you can just remove this in case you are being confused by the type hints in Python. Again, I have a whole series on type hints, so kindly check out my channel for that video. Okay, so now you're going to now specify here a solve dot amount. So initially each person is going to have an amount, and it's going to be initial underscore amount. So initial amount is something that I didn't specify. So creating a person, you have an option to pass in an initial amount. Okay, so it's going to be here, and then by default this initial amount is 0. Okay, you're going to have solve.saving. So going to have solve.saving, and then the solve.saving by default is going to be 0. Okay, so now that we have this, let's go ahead and actually write other methods. Okay, so let's say receive. So receive underscore income, just like that. Receive income, and it's going to take in the solve, and then you're going to pass in the income underscore amount, the amount that is going to receive. Okay, now in here what you're simply going to do is you're going to now say solve dot amount will be equals to solve dot amount plus the income that the person has received. Okay, and then you're just going to do, that's one method, and I'm going to have another method, create underscore expense. So let me just make sure that I get that right. So create expense, and it's going to take in solve, and then solve, and also one thing is going to take in, is also going to take expense underscore amount. So the expense amount is going to, you're going to now put that expense amount. I'm going to say solve dot amount will be equals to solve dot amount minus the expense that the person has created. So you're going to take in the amount, current money you have, minus the expense that you have created. So if you have 100 and you have used expense of amount of 50, then you're going to take 100 minus 50. That will now be your new amount, right? So that's basically it. Then you're going to have another method here. This is going to be it's going to be save. Person has the ability to save some money, so it's going to simply taking solve, and then it's going to simply going to have this following. So it's going to say amount let's say amount to underscore save. Amount to save is going to be solve let me change the solve dot amount multiplied by, it's going to be able to save a 0.3 as 10% of the amount. So if you just call this method, then a person will be person savings solve dot savings is going to be equals to solve dot savings plus the current saving has plus the amount to be saved. So if you call this function, is going to save 10% of that person's income in his or her saving account or something like that. Okay, so we're going to have solve dot amount, and the solve dot amount is going to decrease. It's going to be solve dot amount, because if you save some part of your income into your savings account, then your actual spending account should also decrease by a certain amount, right? So let's say you have 10% in your pocket. Let's say you have 50 shillings in your pocket, and you have saved 10%, which is about 5 shillings. I'm using shilling because I'm from a country that's where the currency is shilling. Okay, so now if you save from 50, if you save 5, then the current amount should be 40. So you take your current amount, which is 50, minus the one you save, which is 5. So that makes it 45, and that will be your new amount, right? So that's basically this function. So let's have a simple function here. Person can have money, can receive money, can use expenses, and also can do some saving. So let's go ahead and see how you can write a test to test if all this works. Okay, so I'm just going to write a simple test to test this specific class to show how you can test a class. Okay, so I'm going to call it test underscore 2.py, just like that. So in test2.py, this is where we're going to write our test functions to test our class and our object and all these methods to make sure that it works as we expect. Okay, so I've just created a file called test2.py. So inside of test2.py, you can go ahead and actually write the logic to test it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, I'm simply going to create a simple method here, a function, and this function is going to be test underscore initial initial underscore amount. So how much initial the person has. So what you're going to do here, I'm going to go ahead and actually create a person, and the person is going to be a person, just like that. But you need to import this person class from the programs. Okay, so from programs dot person import person class, just like that. So I've created a simple person object. So I'm going to say person person dot let's check amount. The person's amount is by default 0, because initially if you have to pass in the amount, or else the amount will be by default 0. So if I didn't pass in any amount, then I expect the amount to be 0. So I'm going to now assert this. So I'm going to say assert this. Okay, so now we can go ahead and actually run a test for this. So I can go ahead and actually run a test for this. So if I go ahead and actually run the test, now you can see that that test is going to pass, because by initial, if you create a person, the person's initial amount is 0, so that it should be also returned to us as 0. So let's go back terminal, and you can see all the tests have passed. So you can see this is the test here, but you can see it's also testing all these other all the other tests in the other file that you are file 1. You can see testing file 1, and then later is testing file 2. So how can you go ahead and actually change this so you can only test the file that you want? So you have to take pytest and -v and then -f. You can say -f, I think -f, and then you can go ahead and start providing the file. So you have to go into testing, and then you have to go into test like that, and you can run this, and this is how let's say not okay, I think you have to remove the F flag, so it's just like this, and then you can see the test has passed. So that's how you can test run test cases in a specific file rather than running all test cases. Okay, so that's how you can go ahead and actually test just as test cases only in a specific file, and you can see you have only done one test and it has already passed. Great. So let's go ahead and actually run another test. Okay, so this test is going to be dev. It's going to be test underscore this is going to be test initial amount 2. So test initial, I'm going to test initial underscore amount, and I'm going to call it underscore 2. It doesn't really matter. So in here, what you're simply going to do is just going to create a person again. So I'm going to say person, and this is going to be a person object, just like that. You're going to give it an initial amount of let's say 50. Okay, so 50 initial amount is 50, or let's just say 100 initial amount is 100. Okay, so initial amount is 100, and you're going to assert if person, going to check if the actual amount is actually amount is actually 100. So we're going to check if that the initial the person's actual initial amount is 100. So we're going to go ahead and actually run that test again, clear the terminal, and then run that test again, and you can see, yeah, it is 100. So all the tests have passed. So if you create a person and you give it an initial amount of 100, it's true that the actual amount is also 100. Great. Now let's go ahead and actually test the receive function. So this is going to receive method, rather test underscore receive method, just like that. And this is just going to now create a person here. The person is going to be person, and you're going to give an initial amount of 100. Okay, and then you're going to person person dot receive amount, and you're going to add a receive amount of 50. Okay, so the person has received an amount, so we're going to assert if the person actually received an amount. So we're going to assert if person dot amount is actually 150. Did this person actual amount add up to 150? Because initially he had 100 and then he received another 50, so his amount now should be 150 rather. So we're going to check if that's the case. So you can go ahead and actually run that test case. So I'm going to play the terminal and then run that again, and you can see indeed it's 150 and the test has passed. Great. Let's go ahead and actually test another method, and this method is going to be create the expense method. So I'm going to say dev test underscore create expense underscore method, just like that method, and this is just going to be a create a person object. This is going to be of type person. So this is going to be person, just like that. And this person is initially the person has an amount of 0. So we're going to test if let's give it an amount of, actually, because it's going to have an expense, right? You can't use an expense if you don't have any money. So initially the person has 100. So we're going to do person person dot so you're going to initially do a person dot create, and then a create expense. You're going to pass in person as user, say 50. So now the person's amount should now be also 50, right? Because he has used already 50. So we're going to say assert person dot amount, right, should now be equals to 50, because the person had 100 and then has used 50. So we're now checking if indeed our person object is actually going to have an amount of 50. So if that is the case, then our code works as expected and the function is going to be passed. So let's run that again. run that again, and you can see we have an error here. So it says short summary import. Okay, I got an error here. So let me just remove this. It actually did an automatic import. Sorry for that. So I'm just going to go ahead to my terminal, and then I'm going to clear the terminal and run that test case again, and you can see that's passed. So all our test cases are working fine. Let's run one more test case to see if the person can actually save some money. So let's test test underscore save method. So in this method, we're going to create a person, and this person object is going to be a person. So now that I've created that person object, initially the person have an amount of 100. So what you're going to do, person. You're going to say person dot save, person dot saving. I think is saving. Yeah, person dot saving. And then let's check if the person that's saving is actually going to return is actually 100. So no, you have to do. Sorry, actually I made an error here. So you have to do here person dot save. Yes, so if you call the save method, it's going to now put 10% of this amount into the saving. So checking if person.saving is 10%, and now we want to assert this. So assert if this is true, then that code is correct. So let's try to run this and check if that's the case. So I'm going to clear the terminal and then run that test again, and then all the test cases have passed. Great. So the person initially had 100, and then he has saved 10% of that money. So the saving should not be in the savings account. In the savings account should now have 10. Okay, now let's also assert to check if the person's amount has also reduced. So person.amount, and that amount should be 90. Okay, if the amount is not 90, then that test our program is not working as expected, and we're going to fail that test case. So if you run it, you can see it has also passed. So great. So everything is working as expected. So one thing before we end this video, one thing you have to notice is that whenever in each of these test cases, you have to create person every time. You see, all the way you have to create person. So how do we solve this? I don't want to be creating this. Is just redundancy, so I don't want to be doing that. So in programming, one thing you want to avoid is redundancy, right? Keep your code dry, follow the dry principle. So one thing we have to one thing you can use to address is what we call fixtures. So fixtures are basically functions, and these functions will be run before a test case is run. So this will be used. We'll create a function, and we'll move all of this creation of the person object into that function, and then that will handle that for us. Means that we don't have to actually or constantly call that create this manually, but all we have to do, write it once and then pass in the function as an argument to our function. So now I'm going to create from Pytest. I'm going to import. I'm going to call fixture. They're called fixtures. Okay. So now I'm going to create a function called dev. I'm going to call it person. Person. Let me call it person underscore 0 underscore initial. Means the person has initial. The person has 0 balance. Okay. And what is going to simply return is going to return, and it's going to return person with initial balance of person. With initial balance of 0, right? So that's what it does. And let's create another one here called dev, and there's going to be a person, just like that, just person, and then it's simply going to return. It's going to return to as a person object with initial amount of 100. Let's say 100. Okay, great. So now that we have that functionality, how do we turn this into fixtures? Now we use the decorators. Okay, I told you decorator. I have a whole series on decorators. So if you know decorators are, check out my YouTube channel. I have a whole series on decorators. So decorator is basically a callable that takes in a callable as an input and returns a callable as an output. So that's basically what a decorator is. So we're going to create a decorator here. I'm just going to call this fixture, and that's all we need. So it is also here. I'm just going to create a fixture decorator here. I'm going to use that decorator. So great. So now all these are now fixtures. So now we can just pass it, instead of creating this person object, I can just go ahead and actually delete that. And that person was initial of 0, right? So we had initially 0 balance. So I'm just going to copy that and pass it in here as an argument to my function. So if I now run this code again, that should work. So let me just go back to my terminal, clear this, and then run that code again. And you can see I have an error here. It says function has no attribute amount. So okay. So now I have used here 0 person, and I have to also call this object as 0 person person 0 initial. Okay. So now whatever we pass in here, you also have the thing is the same object that you have to use. Okay, when you are using the object instance, you have to use this name. Okay, because the name gets stored in there. So now I'm going to go back into my terminal, clear this, and then run this again. And now you can see all tests have passed. So I'm not creating the person object here again. So now let's go ahead and try to repeat the same thing. Now I'm creating a person, and the person has initial initial amount. So it's just the person function. Copy this and paste it in here. And in this case, we don't actually have to change this because this having these two things have the same name, so it will just be person. So you have to now go ahead and repeat it for all the others. So it's just going to be person, just like that. And also here a person object, because it has initial amount of 100. So let me just delete that and delete that properly, and then pass in here a person. Okay, say person, person, just like that. And then here again I have to also pass in person, just like that. So person, just like that. So now that I have passed in all of this, I can go into my terminal, clear the terminal, run this test case again, and you can see all my test cases have passed. So this is how you use fixtures and how to, it helps you to save a lot of time. So even if you do a print statement here, so print, you can say creating person with 100, just go 100, okay, 100 initial amount. Okay, sorry, I'm just typing poorly for today. So now I want to now print this print statement. So I'm going to use the S flag so that you guys can see what's actually going on. So if I do this and then -s, so now you can see before it run every test, it's going to create this is the first test whereby the initial amount is 0. We're not printing anything. That's why you see on the first test case, which is this test case right here, we are creating the person 0 initial, and doesn't have the print statement. That's why if you go here, you can see that print statement. But for these other add functions, we have is saying creating person initial with initial amount 100, and the test case has passed. Creating initial with 100, and the test case has passed. So for each of these functions, for each of these cases, test cases, we are calling this. Okay, that's how it works. So even if you keep here creating another thing, it will also call this. So it will call this basically it's just a function that is being called, and that function simply returns an object, and that object is assigned to this variable, and that's when you can use it into your test case. So that prevents you from repeating your code over and over again. So guys, yeah, that's how we can deal with those test cases. Now one thing I want to do is, how do we handle exceptions? Before we end this video, we'll talk about exceptions. Let's say that in case the person wants to spend money, right? If you don't have let me just show you here. Let's go back into our person here, and let's say that if you go into create expenses, right? If the current money you have is less than your expenses, then you can create that expense, right? So today, basically you want to buy a car, and the car costs 20 and you have 10, you can't buy that car, right? So that we should not address that here. So if amount in our account is less than is less than expense amount, then that should throw an error. So it's a raise, we can raise an exception here, raise exception, and then we can just simply say insufficient fund, just like that. So in this case, if a person has a lower amount and his expenses is greater than the amount that the person has, then that should raise an exception. So how do we deal with an exception? So if I come back to my code, and then I say the person has he created initial person which has initial amount of 100 and is trying to, let's say it's trying to spend 500. Let's see how let's run this and see how it reacts. So let's just run this and see how it goes. So you can see our test has failed. So we have raised an exception called insufficient fund, and our code is raising an exception, but our test is not dealing with that exception. So how do we make sure that our test cases actually deal with that exception? And if they deal with that exception, meaning that our program works as expected, right? Meaning that in this case it's not handling the exception, that's why our test is failing. So now let's go ahead and actually deal with that exception. So before we do that, let's import something from called raises. So let's raises, make sure that you import this called raises, and you're going to use it here. So you're going to say bring it here, and you're going to say with raises, and then you're going to say exception. You're going to accept exception, say just like that, and then you're going to indent all of this. So indent this. So in this case, if I run the code again, this exception is going to be erased here, and it's going to be accepted. So it is going to now clear the terminal and run this code again, and all our tests test cases have passed means that our program realized that this was an error, so it raised an exception. In our test case, it deals with that exception, and there was no error. That's why we have managed to pass that test. So guys, that's all I wanted us to discuss in this tutorial. So in the next upcoming tutorials, if you want me to make a tutorial on how to test your Fast API or any application, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to get back to you. So if I just do this, let me remove this thing and then just run all of the test cases. You can see we have passed all our test cases. So great. So that's the end of this tutorial. So you guys, if you like this tutorial so far, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Keep safe.